Dear ladies and gentlemen, дорогі українці, we apologize for being late, but we have very important reason indeed, and we're going to talk about it a bit later. We are back to online format after a bit challenging days on the London Book Fair. For those who missed previous episodes, yesterday we had Oleg Natyuk and Edward Lucas, and day earlier Andrei Gurkov interviewed by Georgina Godwin. You can find both episodes on our Facebook pages. Я перепрошую за спізнення, але повірте, причина була вагомою, ми про це сьогодні ще поговоримо. Ми повернулися до онлайн-формату після доволі викличних днів на лондонському книжковому ярмарку. І для тих, хто пропустив попередні серії, учора ми мали розмову Олі Гнатюк та Едварда Лукаса, а напередодні Андрія Куркова з Джорджиною Годвін. Обидва записи ви можете знайти на наших сторінках у Facebook. And we continue our dialogues on war, which started together with Russian invasion on Ukraine. This is already episode number 16 in our series of conversation. We are discussing here different aspects to share the knowledge with you, our listeners, who are keen to learn more, think deeper, and hear from the original sources. І ми продовжуємо наші діалоги про війну, що розпочалися разом з вторгненням Росії в Україну. Це вже 16-й епізод нашої серії розмов, де ми обговорюємо різні аспекти питання, щоб поділитися цими знаннями із вами, наші слухачі, які прагнуть дізнатися більше, думати глибше та чути із першоджерел. This is a project of PEN Ukraine, who are in Ukraine right now fighting for their freedom and indeed their very lives under the continuing Russian invasion. We express our support and admiration for their dedication and commitment, as well as the indefatigable spirit of all Ukrainians who are fighting today. Це проєкт українського ПЕНа, члени якого зараз перебувають в Україні, борються за свою свободу, а власне і за своє життя під загрозою триваючого вторгнення Росії. Ми вчергове висловлюємо нашу підтримку та захоплення вашою самовідданістю та невтомним духом усіх українців, які продовжують свою боротьбу. The project is co-hosted by PEN International, which has continued to provide a platform for freedom of expression for those currently under the highest risk. We work under the PEN International Charter. Співорганізатором проєкту є Міжнародний ПЕН, який продовжує надавати платформу для свободи вираження поглядів для тих, хто перебуває в групі найвищого ризику. Ми дотримуємося хартії Міжнародного ПЕН. We are grateful to our partners for today. Traditionally, PEN America, the Ukrainian Institute, the Ukrainian Institute London, UkraineWorld, British Council, the Harvard University Ukrainian Research Institute, and the Harman Institute at Columbia University. We are streaming today's event to all partners' Facebook pages. І ми вдячні нашим постійним партнерам, а зокрема ПЕН Америка, Український інститут Лондона, Україна Світ, Британська Рада, Український науково-дослідний інститут Гарвардського університету та інститут Гаррівана при Колумбійському університеті. Ми транслюємо сьогоднішню подію на всі партнерські сторінки у Facebook. Захід відбувається англійською мовою. And I will switch into English to introduce our dear guests. Both of our guests didn't change their interest and focus since February 24. They both worked with theme of the war, ideologies, and propaganda since earlier. Volodymyr Yermolenko, we're happy to welcome you here, finally. Philosopher, writer, and journalist, author of numerous articles about Ukraine, Europe, global processes in Ukrainian foreign press. He frequently comments on Ukrainian events in the international press. Back in 2017, he co-initiated the project Voice of the War, Veteran Stories. The same year, he was editor-in-chief of a publication, Words and War, Ukraine Facing Kremlin Propaganda. I think that since 2017, there are a lot of things to be updated on those topics. Volodymyr will speak today with Peter Pomerantsev, British journalist born in Kyiv, author, TV producer, and who works for Johns Hopkins University. Starting in 2011, Peter Pomerantsev wrote about Russia with articles in Newsweek, Atlantic Monthly, and other magazines. He coined the term of postmodern dictatorship to describe Vladimir Putin's regime, and we would like to hear more about it today. Pomerantsev has written two important books about Russian disinformation and propaganda. Nothing is true and everything is possible. And here he provides insight into how the Russian state apparatus used black PR to manipulate truth, while the Russian public, accustomed to the lies of the Soviet regime, remains cynical and assume that all of the Kremlin reality is scripted. They say the same about Bucha, actually. And the second one called This Is Not Propaganda. So what is this, Peter? Nowadays, we are asking ourselves each day, as it's very difficult to understand, what is this? And if there are really existing people who enjoy violence, as you said in your interview a couple of days ago, I presume this conversation will be very insightful. Dear gentlemen, stage is yours. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And apologies to the people listening to us who tuned in 15 minutes ago. And that's Volodya's fault. What's your excuse for being so late?
Yeah, I'm sorry for being late, Peter, really. The problem is that
you have a good excuse.
Yeah, we are actually trying with my wife Tanya, who is now near to me, to work not only in the information field but also in physically, bringing humanitarian aid from different cities. So we went from Kamenets, where we're now in Chernovtsi. We loaded our minivan with lots of good stuff, and tomorrow early morning we will heading to Kiev. And unfortunately, the roads, when you're traveling across Ukraine, sometimes unpredictable. Tanya was meanwhile given 2 interviews on the road to Canadian and French media. So they also had, we were stopping on the road to give evidence to them. Of course, today this is a very, tragic circumstance, because you've all seen the attack on Kramatorsk on the railway station, and this is another example of this Russian atrocity. So the life of Ukrainians is like this. So many people are changing their ways of life, trying to do lots of things. Some of my friends have joined the army or territorial defense. Some others, like me, are volunteering, doing physical work or doing a lot of information work, etc. At the same time. So it's kind of an attempt to live a double or triple life at the same time. And sometimes, yeah, we are late for appointments. Sorry about that again.
Yeah, I'm not accepting that an excuse. God, literature still has to come top. I mean, what's going on in the world if you put humanitarian and military needs top? We all know that the word is more important, but I'll forgive you this one time. So listen, I've been asked to, well, you and I talk a lot. We talked a lot before the war, but I really want us to focus now on 2 things, which I think you are very, very important in, not as an analyst, but also as someone who forms narratives and thinks about them a lot. And we can choose which order we want to do them in, but I want to cover both of them. And it's something I'm thinking about a lot, and I'm thinking about really in very pragmatic ways, like what sort of projects do we need to do to A, further and maintain Ukraine's narrative in the world? Because putting it very, very brutally, if the narrative is just about values and sympathy, that won't be enough. Attention will go. It's already started to go, as you know. You can see that in the social media trends. Ukraine is already falling as a topic. So how does one maintain this narrative going forward? And what's the aim of it? Yeah. The aim so far has been sympathy, attention, asking for military engagement, but that's not something you can do forever. So where should it go, and how can it continue and strengthen? And where is it meant to lead to, not just for communication, but also politically and culturally? So that's one thing. And the other thing is, should we even bother trying to break through the Russian informational Iron Curtain, the psychological one, even more than the technological one? The mood, frankly, in DC, where I live, and in lots of Europe is, we're not even going to try. There's no point. Putin's propaganda is so powerful. Russians are clearly enjoying being aggressors. There's no point. As you can imagine, I strongly disagree. And I think the data sets that we're using to make this analysis are deeply, deeply faulty. And we are crediting Putin's propaganda with far too much power when we make this assumption. Which of those 2 topics would you like to start with?
Let's start with the first one.
Okay. So this is the brutal reality. Yes, Ukraine is still on the front page on newspapers because I think editors understand what this is an important war. I think it's a conscious decision by newspapers in the West and by TV channels that this is important. We're going to pay attention to it. Much more indicative of social media. Ukraine is not on TikTok anymore. It's just not there. It's gone. A kid came up to my friend who's an editor the other day and said, "Hold on, is the war over?" And she's like, "No, it's not." He's like, "Well, it's not on TikTok. You know, it's disappeared from my feed." So already attention is going. I can tell that when I write articles. I used to I could see how well they did a month ago and how well they do now. And I think even Zelensky's speeches, which are fantastic, people now know what he's going to say. He's going to look for the connection. He's going to say, "You guys had a big crisis. Here's our big crisis. Here's the connection. Do something." And that's a brilliant tactic. That's completely correct. But it's one tactic. How do you move beyond that? What do you think? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I notice it as well, and you know, let's be clear. It's not something that can surprise us. So we know very much the world of media, and we know the laws of media, and of course, nobody will talk about any particular war forever. So this is something that we have accustomed to already since 2014, and since, you know, the events of Revolution of Dignity, when there was the hike of attention, then it was going down, then there was another, you know, increase of attention, etc. I mean, I think Ukrainians are used to it, and Ukrainians understand that international communication is very, very important. And I'm doing a lot of it in our project, UkraineWorld, etc. But it's not that something that, you know, you really rely upon. So what Ukrainians are relying upon is the effort of Ukrainians themselves. What is more important is not even the way how it is present in global media, I think, but the way what results are we having? What actions are we having? Do we have arms supplies, for example? Do we have understanding that Ukrainian resources are not unlimited? So we have to, you know, work to enrich these resources. I mean, military resources, and from this depends many other things. And on this track, I would say that well, there is more and more engagement in the political support. You know, these global European politicians started to come to Kiev. This is very good. They were very afraid of that. We see in the discourses that the initial discourse was that Ukraine will lose in 3 days. Then the discourse was, oh, Ukrainians are so amazing, so bright, so they will win Russian tanks with their tractors. And it was kind of also comedization of the war, or memization of the war, which is also not very good. I mean, it's good probably for communication image, but it's not very good for final results. So I think we should also be aware that communication is also a means, and its end are practical actions. From what we see right now, the signals that are coming, that, I mean, the stories about Lend-Lease, about the support, the supplies of arms, about the enhancing of sanctions, we are probably on the right track. Although I liked very much one of your tweets. I don't know if you still agree with your tweet, although I was quoting it for some foreign media, that you were saying that Western sanctions are okay, but for 2014. So it should have been a response of 2014, not now. Do you still believe this?
Oh yeah, no, completely. I think we're in the West, we're still fighting 2014. Our model is still to push Putin back into his box, which we should have done in 2014. So all these means being taken now, the sanctions, arming Ukraine. If that had happened in 2014, maybe that would have put Putin back in his box. We're way beyond that. We're fighting the 2014 war in the West, not the 2022 one. Putin will not go back in his box. Nobody is dealing with the reality that we have a belligerent, aggressive, nuclear superpower that is not going to go back in any box, that sees its future as aggression against the rest of the world, whether military or non-military. We're dreaming that he can go back in this box. Everybody wants everything to go back to normal. In America, the elites just want to focus on China. They just want Russia to go away. In Europe, there's a lot of turbulence, as you can tell. But, you know, overall, people still think of this as a local and regional problem. Russia is terrible. Let's get Russia to behave again, and things can go back to normal in the sense of, you know, we can go back to focusing on bigger issues than Russia. That nobody wants to face up to the reality of a Russia that is just sees its future from now on in these, you know, increasingly reckless imperial adventures, not limited at ones like in Syria, but reckless ones. Nobody wants to face up to that because that is a huge headache to face up to. That means changing so many things. That means reorientating so much of the sort of foreign policy plans that America had. Everybody just wants it to go away. Nobody's thinking seriously about how do you change the direction of travel in Russia in any systemic way, because it's difficult, and we're still in denial. We're still in complete denial. So we still have a big journey to go on. Yes, but okay, so you're talking about specific things like weapons, but see, I don't think these are still very ad hoc things. You know, there's sympathy, there's an understanding, you know, in Europe, I think much more than in America, that Russia is a really problematic actor for all of us. And how do we formalize this? My sense is a narrative. We have to move from narrative, which is a word I hate, as you know, largely because I like it when it's used in the terms of narratology and analyzing literature. I just think it's, I think it's terrible for analyzing politics. But for it, you know, I think we have to move from communication narrative to new structures. What is going to be the role of Ukraine in Europe? How do we formalize this? What is this new set of potential alliances that formalize these relationships? Because as long as it's an ad hoc trip by von der Leyen, it'll happen one week and then not the next week. With the weapons, how do we formalize it? What is going to be the NATO-Ukraine relationship? It won't be membership, we know that, but what will it be? And why will it be of mutual interest? Because as we move from communication games to strategy, I know it sounds disappointing as Ukrainian, but the real way to move anything is to understand the motivations of your partners and how this fits into their motivation. So how do you see that? I think until we start asking these questions, we're in this very, very sort of unstable situation where we can't really plan for the future. So what would you like it to be, and how can we move towards that? And we don't have to go into institutional details, but what are kind of, you know, what is the place of Ukraine in the global security structure going forward? What is its place in the story of Europe going forward?
But I would not only limit ourselves to Europe, because we see from what is going on is that international law is not functioning, right? So the discussions, the Ukrainian discussions right now about international security order, it's like they're very interesting. They're probably naive, but idealists. But the changes of the world order always come from the idealist perspective. Because Russia was coming up with the message that international security doesn't work, European security doesn't work. We should rebuild it. We should, you know, and as they don't know how to rebuild it, as they cannot rebuild it, they just want to crack it, right? That's what they're doing. But frankly enough, I mean, how can we live in a world in which there is international law, but there is nobody who will enforce it? There are international courts, so we can, you know, collect evidences about the war crimes, but who will enforce it, right? And we have increasingly in the situation when some of the powers are saying we don't care about international law, like Russia. But we see that this is not only a problem of Russia, because the United Nations, UN Security Council, is not only a place where only Russia has a veto power. So the question is whether we can go to the world system in which we no longer have veto powers, right? In which, for example, in the UN, we will have a situation when much more weight will be on General Assembly, not the Security Council. In which we will go on the international level to the system which is tried by the European Union. We can love or hate the European Union, but the good things they are doing is that renouncing the unanimity vote or the veto power. Can we think about it on the world level? It sounds very naive, of course, from a Ukrainian perspective, because we understand that there is not only Russia, there is America and there is China, who will never, renounce it, and maybe French and Brits as well. But I think Ukrainians should engage all those powers who are also not satisfied with this world order. I mean, this is something we can talk about with Germans. With Germans, we have lots of, as you know, lots of problems, lots of misunderstandings. I think Germany is the most reluctant country in the European Union in the support of Ukraine. But probably we can find other topics with Germany. For example, the reforming of the United Nations. Or we can talk with Japan on this. I mean, this is very interesting that Germany and Japan are, two countries which can really be the most realistic, as they went through a very difficult process onto the Second World War. Today they are still also on a denial mode, without any capacity and willingness probably to take the leadership. But maybe this is time for them to wake up. Maybe this is time for India to also have its word. So Ukrainians start thinking about it. And coming back to your first question, I think it's very important that this reflection starts from the countries like Ukraine. The reflection starts also from countries from the countries like Poland, which understands what's going on very well. It understands that if Ukraine fails right now in this war, if Russia wins this war, then Poland will be next, Baltic states will be next, Finland will be next, etc., etc. So I think we can have a conversation about it. I don't know what you think about it, because it does sound very naive and idealistic, but people who were thinking about the European integration not in 1940s but in 1920s. I'm thinking about this person called Coudenhove-Kalergi, who was an Austrian aristocrat, and who basically he was basically fantasizing about the European integration, because he was trying to invent something as multicultural as Habsburg Empire, which died a few years before. So what do you think? Do you think that Ukraine can come with these initiatives for reforming the world order in two ways? In diminishing the role, at least in diminishing the role of veto power, and secondly, in enhancing the role of enforcement of international law. For example, when it should not be a discussion about sanctions, whether somebody wants to impose sanctions or not, if there is a clear war crime, so clear, violation of territorial integrity. Sanctions should be something coming very automatically. What do you think?
Well, I may have been writing about this recently, so I do have some thoughts. So I think you're framing this in the right way. What we're seeing emerge around Ukraine in an ad hoc way is potentially the embryonic form of restoring the connection between human rights, economics, power, and sovereignty. I think sovereignty is important as well. I think the power of why people have paid so much attention to Ukraine is both the human rights part, the humanitarian part, but also the sovereignty part. And you're quite right, we need a new system that will safeguard the right to exist, basically, of small and medium-sized non-nuclear states. So we're living in a new world where the danger is not Al-Qaeda or Milosevic or these kind of guys. For that, we had a doctrine, based around humanitarian intervention. No one's going to do humanitarian intervention to face off Russia or China. Sadly, I don't think we should be as scared of them as we are, but it's just not going to happen. So you need to be very clear that when these big aggressive states do these sort of things, there will be a system that kicks in straight away. And it will be a combination of sanctions, economic pressure. That means completely rethinking how we're doing globalization. I'm not saying we should stop it at all, but I'm saying there has to be a new doctrine where Germany can never allow itself to be this dependent on a Russia. Yeah, you can't allow it. We can't allow yourself to be this dependent on a Saudi Arabia for your oil. We have to start thinking about this interconnections between human rights, economics, and security seriously, because we don't. Yeah, and you have to always be able to have the potential to do these sort of sanctions and political pressure. And I think we'll get to a point of deterrence. I think we'll get to a point where the dictatorships will do their own networks. They'll respond. They're not going to sit there passively, but they'll still need us as well. And I think the best place we can get to is a place where we know that any stupid actions will lead to kind of economic mutual self-destruction. Yeah. So it's sort of the deterrence theory of globalization, you know. But it has to have human rights in the middle of it. So yes, exactly. When there is a war crime, boom, sanctions kick in straight away. But it has to be related to alliances as well. And we may be able to reach a point of balance. So yes, I think Ukraine is a really important moment to focus on that. But you're quite right. If you want this narrative to continue, don't make it just about Ukraine. It's going to be about Taiwan and Japan. India, I'm afraid you can forget about. India has its own trajectory, doesn't want to be part of any international system. India thinks that's dangerous. India thinks alliances are dangerous. India wants to be quiet on its own, pushing back against China. India has a completely different foreign policy concept of itself. So you can forget about India straight away. There's nothing in the Indian foreign policy world that thinks alliances are a good thing. Yeah, they think they're a bad thing. They think alliances are dangerous. So forget about India, but Japan, yes. Taiwan, yes. Australia, yes. Vietnam, maybe, yes. And many, many other places.
Yeah.
So yes,
absolutely. Absolutely, I agree with your point that we should not. Well, when Ukraine talks about itself, it should not only talk about Ukraine, and this is what Ukrainians have been trying to do since 2014. With bigger or lesser success, because Ukrainians are, sometimes are very Ukrainian-centric, and it's very important for us to, even in the current times, to understand that it's Ukraine which is a part of the world, not the world which is a part of Ukraine. This is a thinking that has to be changed. But yeah, we were, for example, very much interested, for example, myself, when I'm addressed by Hong Kong journalists or by Taiwan journalists or by some other people, non-Europeans or Japanese journalists. It's very important and very interesting to talk to them and to understand them. But look, I think we really entered a very new phase, very strange phase for the West, because the West, just continue what you said about ISIS or Al-Qaeda, the West has accustomed to have thought that the biggest evil is non-systemic, anti-systemic, what is called anti-systemic actors. Therefore, it's so popular to hunt the far-right groups, the terrorist groups, etc. Because basically, if you're a good Western liberal and you're fighting against the far right, it's very dignified, it's very good, and I totally support it. But you kind of live in an illusion that the key enemy of liberal democratic system is basically anti-systemic non-state actors who do not have access to state resources, who do not have access to weapons of mass extermination, mass destruction, do not have access to nuclear weapons, etc. And it was remarkable, for example, how in Ukraine's fight against Russia, much of the discourse which in the previous years, and even sometimes today, was focused about Ukrainian far right. You know, a tiny group of political marginals who never entered, you know, who got 2% on the parliamentary elections. Whereas you have a truly far right country of 140 million people with a kind of a mixture between Soviet and fascist ideologies. You call it postmodern dictatorship, we can call it also postmodern fascism or whatever. So really a ideological hybrid. But the most importantly, which was using and is using the actions which are mostly used by terrorists. I mean, the key strategy is to create the vacuum of safety, create a feeling that there is no safe place anywhere. So this is kind of what we have seen in Syria. This is what we are seeing right now in Ukraine. You cannot feel safe in this country. You can go to Lviv.
Yeah.
You can go to Lviv and have a missile strike, right? So you're kind of your big country of 40-something million people is turned into a place where you're subject to a big missile terrorist attack, and that's what happened today. So what is it? What's happening when you're launching missiles to a railway station where dozens of thousands of people are waiting for evacuation? This is a terrorism on a much bigger scale.
Okay, I'm just conscious of time because we're nearly out of time, and I really want to get onto the second subject. Sorry, because what you're talking about gets onto our second topic. Sorry to interrupt. I just know we have around 3 minutes left now. But we'll try to be forceful on this topic. The reason I interrupted you is that you're starting to talk about Russia, and I do want to spend some time thinking about how does one approach or even get into the question of talking to Russians. And I'll ask one question. I mean, as you know, I live in Washington, D.C., even though I'm currently in Perugia, which is nice. The conversation in D.C., I'm not saying at all levels, but the conversation at the moment is, let's not even try. Who cares? They're enjoying this. You know, let's not even waste our breath on trying to affect public or even private opinion in Russia. Do you share this despondency?
Well, I would share some feeling of Ukrainians. I think Ukrainians also don't really care about it. Maybe it's wrong, but this is a feeling right now. So the problem is that we are facing a big, wall when even the relatives are trying to talk with their relatives in Russia. When people who have their mothers and fathers in Kharkiv and or vice versa, and they all consider to be saying that it's all fake and Russian army is not doing anything bad in Ukraine, etc. So we do face some kind of a blindness of the majority of Russians, but I'm always saying that we cannot use the word all. So we should not use the word all Russians. So we should not be naive thinking that sometimes we see the discourse in the West that it is a Putin's war. So there is a bad guy, a mad guy, a lunatic who basically launched this war, and we should probably wait for until he dies, and everything will be fine. I think this is a big mistake because we see the huge support of him by Russian people, and we basically, I think, see kind of an evolution of the Russian people themselves, how they feel to be a part of kind of a collective identity, where Putin is a kind of a demiurge who is creating this collective identity. This is a big difference to Ukrainians who never need any kind of a demiurge in this way. But at the same time, I think it's also we need to avoid this logic with the word all, meaning all Russians are supporting Putin. All Russians are. So we should somehow find a middle way between all that. And I personally think that the more Russians will see that they fail in Ukraine, that the army is failing in Ukraine, the more they can be reachable. But I want to hear your opinion. How can we reach out to ordinary Russians?
Well, there's two steps. One is the analytical step. We don't really understand in any systemic way where Russians are. I don't think the surveys tell us something. The opinion surveys tell us something. What do people think? But they have to be caveated with two things. A, it's a dictatorship and people, it's hard to get good public opinion in dictatorship. And B, public opinion as a concept doesn't exist in Russia. Surveys presuppose a strong self with a strong set of beliefs, while Russia, for a long time and now especially, is very much in the Hannah Arendtian zone of people will switch their opinions depending on the weather for a bunch of different reasons. There is no culture of having a strong opinion. It doesn't exist. So even the intellectual logic of opinion surveys based on your beliefs is culturally wrong in a place like Russia. I'll remind you, Soviet Union, 1989, who's your biggest enemy? America. Russia, 1991, who's our biggest friend? America. Same people, yeah? It is meaningless. So to even apply the logic of, the sort of Western logic of what do you think about something in Russia it's far, it has a use, but it's deeply limited in Russia. So I would be looking at behavioral economics, consumer data, online searches in Yandex and Google. Bucha is top in the Google searches. People are searching. So I would throw out our whole analytical model and I would introduce a new one. Once we have that, we can start having a real conversation. But we also have to understand what we're trying to achieve. I think on the war itself, people can find the information if they want it. We've got to make sure the information is there technologically. They can find it if they want it. I don't actually think the war is what this is about. I think the main polarization in Russia is not going to be about the war. It's going to be about the idea of splendid isolation. Are Russians happy with this new idea that Putin is giving them about isolated Russia? They say they're happy. They have some very effective propaganda slogans, which are pretty fucking good, to be honest, in terms of their effectivity. They're evil, but they're good. I would then contrast what they say and what they do. If there ever was a time to divide attitudes and behaviors, it's now. So they may say, we love isolation. We don't need anyone at all. I would be looking, what are people looking up on Instagram right now? What are they looking up in their Google searches? How are they planning to watch the Football World Cup in September? Sadly, and it's painful for me to say this, that is much more important to understand what's going on in Russia than their opinions about the war, which I think, it'll be like 20% of people are against it, 30% of people are just sad about it, and 50% support it in various ways. That's probably not an untrue set of statistics because it's shown up through other things as well, not just through attitudinal stuff. So, but that's very hard. And frankly, I don't think anybody emotionally very close to this conflict can be the one driving it. It has to be done in a very cold and evidence-based way. So I think it's going to be very hard for Ukrainians to do it because what can one feel but despair and anger? And that makes sense. Olga, yes.
Yeah, and we probably need some time to do that, right? I have two questions. They state to be simple, but I'm not so sure. The first one is, why do you think the narrative never again failed and how to bring it back to life? And should we?
Volodya, that's a philosophical question, one for you, I think. Why did it fail?
You cheated. Well, I think it failed because of human nature, because we were very naive and we are very naive about human nature. I'm always asked by foreign journalists, like, why do you think it's possible in 21st century? And I'm answering, why do you think 21st century is better than 20th century? What makes 21st century better than 20th century, 19th century, etc.? I'm increasingly becoming a Russoist, meaning not in his naive, maybe naive feeling that human nature is in its essence is good, but in his criticism of the idea of progress. Rousseau understood that technological progress and what he called progress in arts and métiers, I mean in arts and technology basically, is not leading to moral progress. And I think he was right. That's a question whether it leads to moral regression, as he believes. Probably not. But I think we always have to be prepared that for the possible evil. And this is how we also have to construct our international order, international institutions. International order has been constructed in a way, in a kind of a Fukuyamist utopia that the end of history, liberal democracy will win, and it's just a matter of time. Yeah, this is my response.
And the second question is to you, Peter. Our viewer asked why you used to call Putin postmodern dictator, once he acts very old school way and seems to act like Stalin.
So I was describing, no, I think like Stalin, what do we mean? It was never about not having action. That was not what it was about. It was about sort of the use of language. You know, I was talking about early Putin era, like they have, you know, it's a country of simulacrums. There was a parliament, which is not actually a parliament. There are TV debates, which are not really TV debates. There are parties, which are not real parties because they're controlled by the Kremlin. So I was talking really about sort of the Russia of Putin 1.0, so 2000, 2014. But even now, I don't think like Stalin. Yes, like Stalin, obviously, in very obvious ways. But the interesting is not the like. The interesting thing is the differences. And I think Volodya mentioned that even this Nazism is a little bit postmodern. And what do you mean by that, Volodya?
Well, Peter, I think although I agree with this, you know, postmodern concept, and it's very probably illuminating in a sense that it tries to fight with reality. Basically, that's what you have shown in your book. So the real fights of Putinism, or I would say even of Russian ideology since the 90s, is basically fighting against the reality, against facts, against the empiricism. And here's something we see a very strange, you know, harmonization between two trends: Russian religious philosophy, which always hated the reality, factual reality, empiricists, etc., and the postmodern, right? But I think in a kind of, and this is what is happening right now, because they're fighting the reality. Until now, they're basically coming even to more absurdist claims about Ukrainians, Europeans, etc. And probably will end up in a situation when they will invent certain reality. For example, invent their victory in Ukraine, I don't know, military parade in Kiev, make a virtual reality out of that and present it to Russian citizens. This is what's happening. What I'm not really comfortable with increasingly is the very concept of postmodern, because I mean, the postmodernism means that there was something modern, and there was again the idea of progress, and we are in the kind of a latest stages of progress. I think we increasingly should look at what's happening in terms of ancient Greek, ancient Roman vision of history. I would call it like Aristotelian or even Polybian vision of history, where everything basically repeats. We are in the virtuous circle all the time. So postmodern fascism, yes, but if we look, for example, at the way how initial fascism was formed, it was formed in a very similar way. So initially there was this, you know, kind of artistic extrapolation, exaltation in both Italian fascism and German Nazism. It was a creation, invention of reality, visual invention of reality, and then it came to the war crimes and Holocaust, etc. So I'm not sure we should. So at the same time, we should, I think about Putinism as a kind of a sui generis evil, which really has its own peculiarities, which are making it different from the Nazism or fascism. I think we don't have to compare Putin with Hitler, because we're thinking that Hitler is the biggest evil. In a way, Putinism is also not less horrible evil than Hitler is, but in a different way. For example,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
On that
I know that
important
we
note,
both need to run. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your perspective on propaganda and how we should deal with it, probably. This is exactly what we all can take from these conversations, a deeper understanding. Today, maybe more questions, but still some answers. What can I do to help? Today, I would say be realistic, use evidence, prepare your plan with a cold mind, even if it seems to be slightly impossible for now. Russia's war on Ukraine is not fiction, but time to act. Choose your way. We are grateful to our speakers. Thank you both. Thank you for your time. I know you were both super busy to find this hour to talk. We are grateful to our partners for today's event. It's PEN America, the Ukrainian Institute London, UkraineWorld, the Harvard University Ukrainian Research Institute, and the Harman Institute and Columbia University for all the cross-streaming service and all the partners page. Gratitude, of course, to PEN Ukraine, which continues to stand in the front lines in the name of freedom and truth. PEN International is proud to be a platform that supports freedom of expression. Thank you one more time. Have a great lecture, Peter. Have a safe journey, Volodya, and please come back with new insights because we definitely need your opinions in those matters. Dear listeners, follow our dialogues on war. You will find all the updates about the further dialogues on our Facebook pages. Spread the word and stand with Ukraine. This is our shared responsibility today. Thank you.
Thank you.